Nigeria positions itself for post-reform era, the implications of these changes on various sectors, such as agriculture, energy, finance, and technology, has been closely examined. The economy has been seen significant shifts and challenges, prompting a closer look at the ongoing reforms and their anticipated impact on the country's future outlook. Experts say the success of these reforms will not only impact the country's economic performance, but also influence its standing on the global market space. But what are some of the immediate challenges that government must pay attention to? Let's get talking, and I'm being joined by the senior economist with STIRS, Mrs. Dumebi Oluwole. Thank you so much. It's good to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Yes, well, I think I'd like to start with what the central bank governor has said as it relates to reforms and what we are seeing at the moment. He's coming out to say, yes, they are going to stay on with high interest rates to tame inflation. Looking at what we've seen and the factors surrounding the inflation or the kind of inflation that we face as a country, what's your take with regards to this decision or position of the Apex Bank?
I mean, I will say that the CBN is on the mark here, simply because there are a lot of, factors that contribute to inflation in Nigeria. And right now, exchange rate stabilization or the exchange rate depreciation really has been a significant factor. And one way to attract dollar inflows that will now help to tame the exchange rate pass-through effect on commodity prices to inflation is to encourage dollar inflows. And one way to do that is to keep interest rates high. We've seen how, investors have been quite, I would say, optimistic about the CBN's current tightening measure and move to orthodoxy, and how that has, started allowing or triggering some gradual increase in foreign portfolio investments. Though investors are still cautious, we are seeing obvious signs that what the CBN is doing is making some relevant or obvious strides, and the CBN being consistent on this move will definitely bode well for inflationary pressures in Nigeria and eventually, exchange rate stabilization. But the key thing here to actually mention, and the IMF also mentioned this in their Article 4 review, and even the IMF president in a recent interview on Arise TV hinted at this, and I'm very aligned with the fact that And this fact is that inflation in Nigeria is heavily skewed or heavily driven by food prices, right? Food inflation accounts for over 50%, approximately, I would say around 51 to 52% of the items in Nigeria's inflation basket. And what this means is that the higher food inflation is in Nigeria, the more we'll see headline inflation, increase. And right now, the issues or the stoking factors to food inflation in Nigeria are not primarily driven by monetary factors. So that's outside the bandwidth of what interest rate hikes will do. And that's why we're still seeing that even though interest rates have increased by about 600 basis points, we're still seeing a significant increase in inflation. These structural issues are what now call for complementary fiscal measures to ensure that inflation is, under control in Nigeria. From, inadequate infrastructural facilities that are reducing agricultural sector productivity to insecurity. These are the things that fiscal authorities have to, increase efforts towards solving so that the interest rate hikes that the monetary policy authorities have put in place will be more effective in, curbing inflation in Nigeria today.
Interesting way to start our conversation. But let me tell you that I am worried. Energy prices continue to go higher. Yes, that's the truth. And what is happening with regards to electricity tariff at the moment. We even have a labor picketing, NERC, and of course distribution companies across the country as we speak. Now, looking at all of this, many will say, how then do you think that inflation would respond to some of these policies? So moving forward, the impact of all of this, do you see trickling on expected figures? We expect inflation figure this week.
Yes, we do. So you've actually asked me like a couple of questions in one. And I do understand where the I would say bearish sentiments are coming from, because obviously people's incomes are squeezed, consumer wallets are shrinking, cost of living is ridiculously high for a lot of consumers in Nigeria, and there is no denying the painful pinch from all of these reforms. I would just like to start from the fact that everything we're seeing today are symptoms of the reforms that we've undertaken, right? And we will not see significant inflow of dollars into the economy, or even the market stabilizing itself at once, or inflation even decelerating at a faster pace all at once. These are things that would take time, and it's just a function of the reforms that we've put into place. Again, I would reiterate that one of the reasons why we're seeing this happen, and we're seeing inflation happen, interest rates are still being high and will remain high for a very long time, is because we've not yet seen the complementary fiscal measures that we need to slow inflation significantly in Nigeria. And until that actually happens, we'll still continue to see inflationary pressures remain strong while monetary policy remains tight. Remember, it's not a win-win situation for monetary policy authorities right now. They have to find a way to stabilize prices, and by price stabilization, we're looking at not only commodity prices, but also exchange rates, right? So what they're doing is more addressing the symptoms or the impact of exchange rate depreciation on inflationary pressures. On the commodity price side of things, fiscal policy needs to get their hands dirty and actually solve the problem for Nigerians. In terms of the reforms and how they have taken place, there is no doubt that how the reforms started off, was very rocky, and obviously markets are still reacting to that. The fact that the exchange rate is depreciating, or the exchange rate volatility is still very prominent, is one of the reasons why we're seeing electricity prices significantly increase, aside the fact that subsidies are somewhat not really in place anymore. But aside that, I would just stick to the fact that a lot of the things that are happening right now in Nigeria today, in terms of like price hikes, electricity tariffs increasing, these are all part of the reform package. Unfortunately, they're happening all at the same time, and monetary policy moves can only do so much. Again, I will keep clamoring for it, because we've gotten to that point where fiscal authorities can no longer leave the dirty job to the CBN. They have to do what needs to be done to ensure that prices reduce and the exchange rate as well is also stabilizing.
You are an economist, and I think you would understand this better than I do, and maybe some of our viewers. The issue of under-recovery, I think, is coming up again, talking about the price of PMS. I know this question is been everywhere, and even IMF is coming up to say there seems to be an under-recovery at this time. So I'm worried. How do we merge this with a market that should be deregulated? You understand my question already?
Yes, I do. I completely do. And I would say that these are some of the counterproductive and counterintuitive policy moves that are taking place. Although we cannot, we do understand why it's happening, simply because prices are significantly increasing, consumer income is squeezed, and the federal government is trying to ensure that prices don't skyrocket so much that that people are now that the cost of living now becomes too unbearable for people. And I think in the IMF's Article 4 review, if you saw it, which I believe you did, you'd see that the IMF is actually advocating for sequencing of the reforms. And what this looks like in reality is ensuring that those social, safety nets are already in place to cushion the impact of these reforms. So in a world where we're seeing an increase in electricity tariffs for Band A customers, and these people are still experiencing fuel scarcity, diesel prices are short, food prices are extremely high, and you see that they're already complaining. Now you look at what is even happening with more vulnerable Nigerians, to even somewhat picture how painful the cost of living crisis is in Nigeria, and then there is no social safety net available for this sect of consumers in Nigeria. So basically, again, it still rests on the palm of fiscal policy makers right now, fiscal policy authorities, and until we see them push funds to where it is necessary, we'll definitely still keep seeing this bump in the reform package that we've undertaken. It's extremely important that the most vulnerable Nigerians are catered for. That way, they are able to cushion the impact of increase in petrol prices. And when you actually even take a deeper dive into the data of the consumers of energy in Nigeria, you would realize that a bulk of Nigerians are not the consumers of petrol or diesel or even electricity. We still have over 50% of Nigerians that are not connected to the grid. And a lot of these consumers are domiciled in rural areas that people don't even make use of, so much petrol or even diesel, or they don't get adequate electricity. So the point is that even though they are the hardest hit and they are the ones that have to be, catered for, because they are not, food constitutes, a lot more of their income. The deal is they have to still be catered for. I think I'm going on a ramble here, but basically the point is that the most vulnerable Nigerians have to be catered for. And then the Nigerians that are, consuming this products, these products have to be available for them to consume. And then they will now be the ones to decide to reconstitute how much they consume, on a daily basis of the particular commodity. An example would be a home that would normally buy a 25-liter gallon of petrol, right, will probably not do that anymore. They probably will buy half. And the expectation here is that they are paying more for electricity, so they should be getting more for electricity. So their demand for petrol will also reduce. But in a situation where they're still not getting enough electricity and petrol is scarce, that's where you're seeing, these consumers, fighting basically for their lives here. But generally, it all still rests on the palm of fiscal policy authorities.
Brilliant. Yes, I like the way you practicalized it, make it, let everyone understand where we are coming from. Almost finally, now, there's too much of focus on the federal side. Everyone keeps talking about the federal government, that's regards to addressing the fallout of subsidy removal and, of course, opening up of the foreign exchange market, the impact of all of this. The states definitely have a role to play here. I don't know, in your thoughts, what do you think should be done to complement whatever the federal government is doing before we get to that point where we start to maybe things get back to normal?
Yeah, believe me, I'm an advocate for it. There is how a federal state there's how federalism should work ideally, right? And we shouldn't be having a world where state governments are not accountable for their revenue and are not even pushing forward to increase their revenue. We shouldn't be having a world where states have become extremely dependent on the FAC revenue they get every month from the federal government. So, what you're having right now is, if FAC revenue is not sufficient for a state, they are not functioning properly, and that shouldn't be the case. Each state in Nigeria has resources, or they have resources that they have comparative advantage in. And what that looks like is a state that is producing cocoa, for instance, should be accountable for how much cocoa they produce and be very, insistent on being productive in how much cocoa they produce and export. This system works very well in the United States. The United States is a very good template for Nigeria in terms of how state productivity should work and state competitiveness should work, right? So we shouldn't have a situation where states are very dependent on the federal government for revenue to run their various states. And right now we're seeing a state like Abia State actually, come out of that funk of FAC disbursements, right? Other states like Rivers, to an extent Lagos, they've been able to, outshine other states in this regard. Ogun State and Oyo State are also coming up on the mark here. At least the base is based on recent data from budget. But again, we need to see more states actually do a lot more of this. States that have resources in lithium, copper, palm oil, rice, tomatoes, different things. We need to see states actually take up those natural resources and do a lot more with it. Attract foreign direct investors to their states, attract people to their states. And the only way these things can work is when there's, number one, infrastructure, right? So those states' budgets that we've seen, a lot of infrastructural projects that have been there for years and they're still not completed. States need to dust their books and come out of that and make sure that this infrastructure are actually in place for businesses to, take advantage of and increase productivity. This way we would see increased employment, we'll see increased output, and states are able to generate more income. And then you would also see an increase in migration from other states that are already congested because of the resources that they have. And we'll see, an inflow into other states that right now people are running away from. But again, the important thing here to also note is even when states decide to do this, how about the issue of insecurity? And this solely also rests on the part of the federal government. And the reason why I'm going back to the federal government is because right now Nigeria is functioning from top to bottom. Right? If there is no increase in accountability or increase in effort from the federal side of things or from federal government to ensure that things work from a regulatory standpoint, from a political standpoint, from a policy standpoint, we will see states continue to slack. And until that happens, and if the states slack, local governments will slack. If local governments slack, communities will slack, and that way we will see the Nigerian community or Nigeria in itself continue to remain dysfunctional in how it achieves productivity. Even though there will be some that would probably speak about the inductive way of doing things and how the government can actually, or how the state can function from bottom up. We need to remember that a lot of the dysfunctionalities we're seeing from the bottom side of things, from bottom of the pyramid, have come from the top.
Brilliant stuff as usual. Dumebi Oduwole is senior economist with Stirs Business. Thank you so much. It's really an interesting one having you on the program today. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up next.